Recording in progress.
All right, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about how you can use explaining the timelines in real estate to help motivate buyers and sellers to have some urgency. So there's a couple different timelines I think that are always been very helpful in slowing down and explaining and really talking through with clients. So again, as a professional, it's your job to go in and explain and really break this down and almost think on behalf of your buyers and your sellers, right? So don't assume that just because you explain that something takes 30 days, that they're comprehending that. You've got to remember, this is something that you do week after week, month after month. And a lot of times for your sellers, a purchase or a sale of a home happens once every 6 to 9 years. And so it's not something that they're really used to. And when you say 30 days from now, or it takes 30 days, that doesn't register to them quite as much as if you actually pull out the calendar and start talking about actual dates. So that would be one thing too to really consider as we walk through this. And I hope you'll hear in the examples I provide and what I'm sharing, that often I would literally pull out a calendar on my phone, or I am a paper person. There's a lot of times I had a paper calendar, planner kind of a thing that I would pull out too and talk with them. But the timelines that we'll go over today that were very helpful are a timeline in regards to finding a house and talking about what that timeline looks like. And the contract deadline timeline. So what are the different timeframes that are involved in the contract with really like a start and end time? The loan timeline, because there's definitely things that you can explain and use to your advantage to help motivate people to do something sooner, or to truly understand what it is they're up against when it comes to the loan. And again, these are very simple. I put together a simple spread PowerPoint just so that you guys could have it to reference while I'm talking. And then finally, mortgage payments on their current house. So let's get started at the very beginning. You're going to go, you may very well get a phone call, and you're going to listen and do some pre-qualifications for that phone call. Often these timelines are things that come up on the buy side of things. You do have timelines too when it comes to listing someone's house and getting it ready for market. And you're going to talk through how long do you think you need to complete these staging things to get it ready to go on the market. And yet most of it's going to kind of lean more on the buy side of things. And that's what we're kind of focusing on today. All right, so talking about finding a house with your clients in that timeline. Often someone would call and say, Elizabeth, we really want to buy a house and we'd really like to have purchase something in September. If you're not careful and slowing down and taking the time to qualify what they mean by September, sometimes you're working off of the wrong timeline as well. So the initial first question I would encourage you to ask there, do you want to have keys in your hand in September? Or do you want to start looking and make an offer on a house in September? Using that example of, do you want to have keys in your hands, was a very good visual and a good way to clarify, are they wanting to take possession in September? And that gives you a starting point of working out what the timeline needs to be for that client. That client says, oh no, I think we were thinking we would more probably start making an offer then, because we should have some credit cards paid off by then. And John gets his bonus in September, so we'll have that additional cash. Then you understand that your timeline needs to work off of them making an offer in September. Now, if they do say, we would really like to have keys in our hands in September, then you understand that that needs to be the closing date, and you should work backwards from that date in September as far as when they need to be looking and making offers. Make sense? All right. So one of the things too that I encourage people as far as finding a house and explaining the time it takes to find that house and why that should be factored into that timeline. So often I would say, okay, some people like to get to know the market. So if you don't want to actually start making offers until September, let me go ahead and get you set up on a search. I can get you to where we can have our initial conversation and really get you comfortable with what the process is going to look like, what some of the cash involved is going to look like for you. And then you all can use that search to get to know the market. If you'd like, I can also set you up to where you can start attending open houses in those areas, so you can really kind of get to know what you can get for your money. And guys, depending on your availability and how much you gauge how serious or how motivated they may be, my availability when I had time and I was a newer agent, I would say, and I don't mind walking through a couple houses with you once you guys get pre-approved, even if we're not going to actually put an offer on a property until September. Just because I knew that was going to help secure them as a client for me, and was a part of the process for them, and was a part of the process for me as well. So getting to know the market is one piece and one part of the timeline that I like to encourage people and to try to provide some motivation. Because I will say a lot of times you get them set up on that search and you go through all the rest of these timelines, and pretty soon people are no longer wanting to make an offer in September. They're actually comfortable buying something in early August. Or really, if it was the right house, they'd make an offer in July. So by the time you get through all of these timelines too, guys, sometimes they're willing to move faster and make an offer sooner. And that's good for you too in your business, as you can get them under contract, close, and then be able to assist the next client. So getting to know the market and using that as an opportunity to ask permission for them to meet, go over process, find a buyer agency with you, and asking permission to get them set up on a MLS search. Finding the house, the other point I often like to make when it came to timelines was some buyers find a home immediately. Other buyers, it takes multiple months for them to find something and or to get it under contract. So even if we find great houses for them, the market's competitive and sometimes it takes a little time before we can win one. And so taking the time to explain to them and really work through their timeline. Again, if it's an example of someone that wants to have keys in their hand by September, then you're going to maybe encourage them to start looking sooner and then negotiating a longer close time, or talk through some of the other timelines with them to see what their comfort level is. Because if they have to be out of their apartment and have keys in their hand by the end of September, that's an important thing to know, and that sometimes it might take a little while for them to get under contract. So it would be good for you to get out and get looking ASAP, so they've got the most opportunity to make sure that they can find something and get it closed before the end of September. So that was a script, or that was a point I like to take the time to make with people. Sometimes you find something immediately, and sometimes it takes months. And if we want to be able to remove as much pressure off of us as we can, let's give ourselves the air on the side of having more time rather than less. All right, guys. So that's kind of often the initial conversation and walking through kind of some of the initial, what is it, to get their juices flowing on how everything kind of works. The next one that we're going to go over is something that often was really helpful too, and again, explaining that we're going to be working backwards. And again, we've already got their date that they either want to be starting to make offers on, or a date in which they absolutely want keys in the hands or need to have keys in hands because their lease is up. So the next piece was the contract date. And I like to often explain, if we're using a loan, we really need to work in there at least 30 to 45 days for you to have for your for the contract timeline, as most lenders are going to require anywhere from 30 to 45 days to close your loan. But also that's kind of industry standard that you're going to give a seller, and that's a common timeline in which to work off of. So again, if we want to, and I would use their dates, if we want to make sure that we're closing on something by the end of September, and again, that's when you're pulling out your phone and you're looking at the calendar on a monthly basis. So guys, the last day in September, and I often would go through that with people, the last day in September, if you're giving the keys to your apartment up on the last day of September and you have to be out, is the 30th, which is a Thursday. So we really, if we need to have at least, and we can't move everything in a day, so we got to be a reminder of that. And sometimes I would include that as well, to say, gosh, it would be nice to have a weekend to get everything out of the apartment and then use that time to that next week, those 4 days, to maybe clean the apartment and get those last few items, because we all know that's the most painful part of moving. So maybe we look at trying to close something on Thursday, September 23rd. Worst case scenario, if we needed to, we could close on Monday the 27th or Tuesday the 28th, and then you guys could really boogie at getting everything moved out of the apartment. But maybe we really try to work off of the 23rd of September. All right, so I'm going to break there for a second. Do you guys see how it's really helpful to bring out the calendar and look at the calendar and realistically talk through what this move is going to look like and what closing is going to look like? Because now we're not just saying, oh, you want keys in your hand by September. We're really talking about the logistics of you moving and closing on a house. So September 23rd is what we're working off of. If I know that we need to at least have 30 days, we're working with a great lender like Tanner, and Tanner does have the ability to, if your clients go through underwriting, to close them in less time than that, in 2 weeks or 21 days or something of that sort. But I really like to leave that for emergency cases and not work off of that for our planning purposes and for our motivational purposes. So guys, if we're looking at the 23rd of September, ideally, worst case scenario, we really would want to be under contract by 30 days prior to that, which is going to put us at, and again, you're getting your phone out, ideally August 23rd, which is a Monday. So we really want to try to be under contract no later than August 23rd so that we can give the lender 30 days to be under contract. And this isn't a perfect world where the sellers may very well want more time, and we'll talk about that. But okay, so at least the 23rd of August. If it's a 45-day contract, then that's putting us more at like August 9th that we'd like to be under contract, so that you can have keys in your hand by end of September by that 20th. Okay, does that make sense, guys? So now we've got a window, and I often had my notebook out and I was making notes of these things, right? And by bringing the calendar out and asking them to bring their calendar out, it made it real. And it got to where they were really thinking a lot about what does this really look and feel like and what's our comfort level. So on my notebook, I'm often making a note of, we want to close by September 23rd, Thursday, September 23rd. And again, we have wiggle room in there. And then what did we say before? We said September, Monday, the 27th or the 28th of September would also maybe possibly work. So then I'm making note of that in my notes so that I can reference it later. And so I'm doing that visual for the buyer or the seller so that maybe they take the clue that they also should take notes on what day they should be closing, if that makes sense. So that's a visual clue to them of like, maybe you should write this down too. But I often would go back and email it to them later. So then off of that close date, we just calculated that ideally we would want to go under contract in that window between August 9th and August 23rd. And I'm making that note. And that's if it was a 30 or a 45-day closing. So that's kind of our sweet spot where if we had to do a 30 or a 45-day closing, or that's kind of our worst case scenario that we really want to, that's when it's going to be go time. And it's going to be kind of where we're really under the gun to get under contract. I often would then also explain, especially if I'm trying to motivate someone and I know that they've got the ability and the comfort zone, and I've already thought through a lot of these things before I've gone to the appointment, to explain that some sellers may want 60 to 90 days because they may have some other property that they need to go secure. And so in that conversation during the meeting, I would often say, guys, in order to be competitive in this market, sometimes we do need to come to where the sellers want to be. And so if we want if a seller wants a 60-day close, then we're looking at wanting to be under contract no later than July 23rd. And July 23rd is next Friday, so a week from this Friday. And that would be something where I'm not trying to freak anyone out, right? And I'm again making a note of 30 to 45 days puts us in this window. A 60-day close puts us at July 23rd. Oftentimes, you're going to find your clients' wheels are already spinning in their head, where they're like, oh man, we wanted keys in our hands by September. I always just assumed that we wouldn't even start looking at houses until like, mid-August. And now you've motivated them from thinking about maybe going and looking at houses in mid-August to you're talking about if a seller wanted a 60-day close, we might need to be be considering making offers starting, if something of that property was of interest, we could make an offer by next Friday, the 23rd, and still meet your goal of having keys in your hands by the end of September. And so you're kind of almost giving them permission to start looking now and starting looking now. And all of these conversations that I'm going through right now, I would go through in this order, because as we go through each timeline, I'm building motivation and I'm building confidence that they can start shopping tomorrow if they want, because if they want to have keys in their hands by the end of September. Does that make sense? I'm going to just go with yes. So, okay, guys. So again, pull out your calendar, and someone telling me they wanted keys in their hands by end of September. I've been able to identify that our timeline needs to be more than likely closing between the 23rd of September, or worst case 27th or 29th or 28th. Now moving kind of to the next timeline. This is a really fun one, and it's often where you will get people to say, okay, set me up on that search, and then can we go look Thursday night? Because you don't have any work meetings Thursday night, right? Like, we can go Thursday night. Explaining the loan timeline. Again, we've already mentioned that they need 30 to 45 days for a loan to get processed if they're going to be using a loan. Again, if it's cash, you can close in as little as 3 days if title work can get done. Most cash deals too, like 10 days is what a title company will be grateful for, to be able to get title work done. But a cash deal, you can usually get closed in a lot shorter time. But if we're using a loan, in order for it to be a comfortable process to where everyone's not scrambling to get inspections done and appraisal back and all the closing disclosures out, 30 days is a good number. Again, Tanner can do it quicker because he's amazing. And you can use that to your advantage. But the piece I want to talk about on the loan timeline is the closing date. So if you set your closing date, and for, let's say that we hit our ideal closing date of September 23rd, mortgage payments skip a month because interest is paid in arrears as a part of their closing cost and their prepaids. So closing September 23rd would mean their first mortgage payment would not be until November 1st. So here's another example. And when I would say that to people off of the timelines that we're already working out, so you close September 23rd, you wouldn't actually have to make a mortgage payment until November 1st. You could usually tell from their facial expressions if they're like, oh, wow. So, okay, if we didn't have to have double, we were saying September because we didn't want to have a rent payment and a mortgage payment. I often would watch that reaction, and or think about the other conversations we've had about their cash flow and how much cash they have available to them. Because if it's going to be beneficial in our situation to not have a mortgage payment and not have a rent payment for both, for the month of October, because that's going to help with moving expenses, keep that in mind. But sometimes too, with their face would light up, I would say, so again, guys, if we were to close in August, anytime in August, your first mortgage payment wouldn't be until October 1st. A lot of times they would perk up, and that would give them some comfort. Well, if we go out and start shopping now in July and we end up closing in mid to late August, then I don't have double mortgage and rent payment. And then they're like, okay, yeah, even more so. Let's get in the car and start looking at houses. We're ready to go make an offer on something. Does that make sense? So anytime you close, it skips a month, and take the time to draw this out for people. Sometimes when I drew it out for people, I would say, okay, so August 12th, and then I would make a September 1st, and then I would make an October 1st. Because you will have some people too that do not do well with dates or times. And I would say, if we are closing, you love my drawing, if we're closing August 1st, we skip September 1st, and then we have an October 1st date. Sometimes making that visual when you're talking a lot about dates and such, it's very helpful that they can either, and I would take a photo of it and then leave the paper with them, or encourage them to draw it out themselves too when you leave. It gives them the ability to remember that when they're having partner conversations after you've left and discussing what their timeline really looks like. I would encourage you to be sure that you're taking time to talk slowly, which you guys have no idea. That is incredibly hard for me. But you're talking slowly, you're reading and looking at the body language of your clients, and that you're asking if that makes sense, right? Does that make sense? And sometimes I would take it on myself to say, oh man, I feel like I'm not explaining this very well. Even though I knew dang well I was explaining it just fine, but they weren't comprehending, I would take it back on me and say, oh, okay, if I saw that there was a lot of confusion in their face. And that's when even more so, I would take out the paper and I would draw it out for them and say, so does that make sense? And until they actually are nodding and going, oh, okay, yeah, so we could actually start, if we ended up accidentally finding something we loved and closing in August, kind of a thing. This is a powerful, powerful tool for getting people to motivated to get out and start looking. By the time they've contacted you, they've been online looking at properties. They may have walked through some open houses and such, but they're pretty darn motivated a lot of times to go ahead and get something. And often you'll be very surprised, people, when someone says they wanted keys in their hands by September 3rd. They were trying to avoid the double payments, but they'd get the heck out of that apartment tomorrow if they could. And if you explain to them that they're not going to have double payments, they're really apt to say, yes, let's go look at a house and let's close in August, because I don't want to spend another minute in this apartment. It's driving me nuts. Another piece of this is sometimes those people that aren't far enough down the line, you can provide motivation to and explaining it to them to where all of a sudden, or they didn't know when they would want to start looking. You're giving them the tools to really look at a calendar and understand what dates and what those things kind of look like. Any questions as of yet? I'm going to take a breath myself and see if I'm making sense. I know this doesn't seem super powerful, but doing it on a one-on-one level and sitting down and getting out the calendar and talking actual dates with people is really super helpful with motivating them. It's even more helpful with you being very clear. I'm helping you through this process. You are not alone. We're going to walk through step by step together, and I'm thinking for you. And that gives them so much confidence that you're going to take really good care of them and make it a really good experience for them. All right, any questions? Zach's in the room here. Any questions? Yay. All right, this may be really basic stuff, guys, that you've already talked through, but finally, when you are meeting with a current seller and or you're in negotiations, whether you're on the buy side or the seller side of things, mortgage payments on their current house, the timeline on how that works. And I did use this from time to time when I was apart, maybe $2,500 from where the seller wanted to be on negotiations. And guys, we are getting those opportunities with the shift that we're experiencing in the market right now, to where we can go in and we are countering back and forth with sellers and such. But basically, I would point out that if a mortgage is paid off by the 15th of the month, then the seller would not need to make a payment that month, because mortgage payments are due on or before the 15th of the month to avoid a late fee. Now, I would use this with great caution, and I would not take it down to the wire at all. I would leave it in my back pocket often. With both, when I was negotiating, by all means, I would leave it in my back pocket and use it as kind of that last little ditch to maybe bridge a gap to get us to come to terms. Because if, let's say, for example, a deal closes and funds on the 12th, it would need to, everybody's closing needs to be early in the day so that it does actually close on the 12th, which is a Thursday, so that the loan would be paid off well before the 15th. So it's not where we're writing offers on the 15th or the 14th and hoping that they get paid off. You really do need to look at the calendar and make sure that there are business days for this to occur. And that if it didn't fund the same day as closing, it was the next day, you would still have time for the title company to turn and a business day's time. Does that make sense? But if they closed and funded on the 12th, then those sellers would not need to make a mortgage payment. Their payoff would include the interest for the additional interest for the time between the 1st and the 12th. But guys, sometimes, depending on the size of the property, a mortgage payment can be $2,800 or $2,300. And if a seller doesn't have to make that $2,300 a month mortgage payment, that frees up cash for them to come down on the price if you're a buyer's agent. And if you're a listing agent working with a seller, you can say, guys, if we can get your house on the market and I feel like price it competitively, I feel confident that if we get it on in early August, we can get it under contract, hopefully towards closing within 30 days, and we can close it early September, so you're not making that mortgage payment in September, and that frees up that $2,300 for you to pay to movers to move your stuff. Again, this is not something I went to often. It was something they kept very much so in my back pocket and only brought it up or brought it out when there were situations where either cash was really tight and or I needed to get creative to get a deal to come together, kind of a thing. And for those people that watch every penny, these are the people that I would make these comments to and point this stuff out to. All right. Does that make sense, guys? I know it seems really, and I feel silly talking about timelines, but I can't tell you the amount of business and the amount of houses I sold by just slowing down and explaining timelines. I went to Christmas parties and had associates say, or people say, former colleagues of mine say, oh, we want to move in June. And then when I sat down and went through each of these timelines with them, I said, well, let me just come over and we'll look at your house and we'll just look at what things you need to do and consider doing before putting it on the market. We can just chat. And then I used that appointment to go through all these timelines in the same kind of fashion. And by the end of the timeline, the conversation, they were like, oh, well, yeah, I guess maybe we do go start look. We could just start watching the market, next week. You can put us on one of those searches or whatever. And then like the great house pops up and we went and made an offer on it and they ended up moving 2 months sooner than they were expecting to normally. And we're happy as can be and pressure was off. I mean, lots of things come into play with timelines too, guys. When people say, my kid starts kindergarten in the fall of 2022, and we want to be moved and settled before she starts kindergarten, that is not a looking for a house in June of 2022 time. If you really want to talk to them about the reality of that, you get to have a conversation about a timeline of, well, we could wait until next spring to go and look, but this spring was really crazy and hard for people to get under contract. And so I don't know if you want to risk like waiting until the spring and then not being able to, and having the stress of getting your house sold and trying to find something, and get under contract and beat out others with someone else. So that's an option. Another option would be maybe we look now in the fall, you guys can get completely settled and then you'll be ready for a kindergarten roundup in February. So all of those things are conversations that as a really good agent, you're having a thought process about, and you're not being afraid to have that conversation with them. Because somebody might say, yeah, no, Elizabeth, we're good with next spring because we're going to use our refund money from our taxes for part of this kind of a thing. But those are all timelines that you as an agent got to slow down and talk through with them to really, help them make the best decisions and put them in the place of being successful. Because it's nothing worse than when you've got a buyer that would write a contract tomorrow and they'd buy a house tomorrow and close in August. And yet if they don't close by the end of August, then they're going to renew their lease. And that transaction and that sale is, you're under the gun for it, and it's in limbo on whether or not you're going to get to close them and have that transaction this year or next year. And a lot of this legwork can assist you in them being successful, which is the number one most important thing, but also you being successful and your stress level being lower. All right, I know this is kind of a different training for y'all today, but I appreciate you. Any questions from anybody online? All right. Thank you guys. I appreciate you. And I can't wait to see you guys tomorrow at awards. All right, thanks. Bye.